So before we dive in here on Quantumsafe, just want to give you both an opportunity just to introduce yourselves quickly.
Sure, my name is Scott Crowder. Work at IBM, work on the quantum program. Now I am responsible for getting people to use quantum computers. I also have experience in starting our post-quantum cryptography or Quantumsafe program, which is more about coming up with tools and methodologies to make the transition to post-quantum cryptography easier.
Mark?
Yeah, hi, I'm Martin Whitworth. I'll borrow from Sudeep and say I'm here to learn. My background, I was a cryptographer in the military and then spent many years as a Chief Information Security Officer for a number of enterprises. And now I find myself at S&P, where I'm a lead cyber risk expert. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Great. So I think, as we already heard, I think the audience and I think the world at large is really interested in this question of how secure is our current cryptography. So why don't we just pick on that question, pick up right from there and jump into this idea. So let's talk about a bit, how can quantum computing threaten our current encryption standards? I don't want to just make it oversimplified and say breaking blockchain, but let's dive into it and talk about why it's not that simple.
Sure, so I guess to start, there's like two really basic kinds of cryptography, and Martin can go much deeper than I can on this. But one of them is asymmetric, one of them is symmetric. And there's two like basic quantum algorithms that people have put on a blackboard. One that's a threat for asymmetric cryptography, and one that's not really a huge threat, but kind of applies to symmetric. So this guy named Peter Shor in 1994 on a blackboard, as Jay was saying, kind of came up with a really innovative way to use quantum information science to find the patterns in the problem or the math that we're using for our asymmetric cryptography today. So this is just a chart that shows that, but basically what he showed was if I had a quantum computer of sufficient size, I can exponentially faster or more efficiently factor numbers, which is what the math or the computation and similar computation is used for basically all of our asymmetric cryptography. So what the hell is asymmetric cryptography? This is basically how we exchange keys with each other. And this is how we digitally sign things. So the implication of this is that at some point in the future, and if you listen to like CNSA, like US government or NIST, they're basically signaling really strongly that you need to get your stuff together, and we're going to deprecate the current ones by 2030, and we're not going to allow you to use them by 2035. So the good news is that people have come up with other math that they think quantum computers are also bad at, but are convenient to use for cryptography. So these are some of the examples here. The bad news is that you got to go find all your current cryptography and go change it, which is not a trivial logistical problem. And we can talk more about that in a second. So that's at a high level. Blockchain is a little bit more complex, to your point.
Right.
So blockchain, you can think about three different things that you do in blockchain. One of them is kind of like you have your wallet or effectively your account. That's where the asymmetric cryptography risk comes in. A second part is the mining itself, and the third part is the network consensus. Those are kind of more fall into the symmetric category. Like I'm oversimplifying a little bit here, but it gets really complex. So,
Sure.
So what you got to worry about in Bitcoin is the addresses that you use to say I own this Bitcoin, give it to me, right? And the issue is that once your public key is out there in public, that starts the clock on the bad guys, if they had a quantum computer, to be able to crack that asymmetric code. The biggest problem is hygiene. So what you don't want to do is use the same address multiple times, because once it's public, theoretically someone can break it in the future.
Absolutely.
But hygiene is not so good all the time. So that's the biggest risk.
Yeah, Martin, you want to?
Yeah, I think it's great. And I mean, two things. One, I think Scott's made a really great point that it's public key crypto systems that are really at risk from Shor's algorithm and exponential changes in the speed at which the problems can be solved. And yeah, symmetric systems are reasonably safe. So the sky is not going to fall down. You know, this is the thing. Yeah, forget these reports that say Chicken Little. The whole crypto system is falling down. It's not. There's lots of great work being done on new algorithms. Even on your bitcoins, you know, don't worry too much. I think there's only about a quarter of the bitcoins in existence that use the public key crypto system that's addresses.
Yep.
Right.
So you know, that's what, 80 million Bitcoin. So that's neither here nor there yet.
Unless you happen to own it.
Right. Yeah, this you're holding it. Yeah.
But I think, you know, take note of this. There's been lots of work done by lots of very bright people developing new algorithms. And we should really, you know, it's great that NIST have really pushed this. It's great that the governments around the world are pushing this now and hopefully people will start taking notice.
So that is a good positive message. So I think we should dig into it a little bit more. So what do we think are the key weaknesses right now in sort of today's IT infrastructure regarding quantum threats? And whoever wants to start. I'd like to hear from both of you, so whoever wants to first.
Okay, so I think instead of looking at purely infrastructure, I think what we should look at is the processing environment for enterprises. And to be honest, the biggest problem out there is that, and I'd say nearly all enterprises would struggle at the moment to identify all their uses of cryptography across their processing environment, whether that's their in-house developed applications, it's standard tools that they're using, their supply chain, their cloud service providers. Yeah. Unless you know where you've got these potential risks, you're not going to mitigate them. So I'd say that the biggest problem in infrastructure and environment is actually understanding your use of cryptography, because a lot of it you're probably using and not aware of it.
Yeah. I mean, just to give you a feel, just same exact message. Like, talk to a lot of CISOs and CIOs, and it falls into two categories: stuff I get from other people and stuff I code myself. Right. And they're two different problems. One of them is kind of sort of like the Y2K thing, in the sense that you need to go find every place you had 2 digits in your code and change it to 4 digits. Like, it's oversimplifying. The problem in cybersecurity is that cybersecurity isn't quite so nice that you fix it once and you're good for the next 10,000 years. It doesn't quite work that way in cybersecurity, but it's the same concept. But the more complex thing, which is where you get into why you need to collaborate and consortia and like being all on the same page and standards and blah, 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 is most stuff in the IT supply chain today, in our today's digital economy, is stuff you didn't write yourself, that you're relying on your supply chain. And that's where it gets really complex. It is easy to remediate if you own both ends yourself. So you will see that, like, even today, like, a non-trivial % of the traffic out there has already moved to post-quantum cryptography for the people like Apple iMessage, Google Chrome, blah, 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 where they can control both points. It's easy for them to update to the newest standards. That's pretty straightforward. That's going to cover a lot of stuff. But to protect your full digital economy, your supply chain, your credibility, it's harder because exactly the problem that you mentioned. It's understanding what your stuff is and where it is, and what the priority is in fixing it, and understanding all your vendors' stuff and making sure they're all consistently fixing it at the same time.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think there's a key thing here. The likes of Apple, Google, they've got masses of engineers who are up to speed and understand their systems and can attack both ends of that chain. Anyone who's working in the financial services sector, how long did it take you to change your SHA algorithm for hashing? You know, it's a relatively simple change. Just change the algorithm, and it's taken probably 13, 15 years to change that, because the code base that you're working with, a lot of it is, you know, call it legacy, call it heritage. I think that's the new vernacular. You know, we've got heritage code out there that no one understands, or if they do understand it, you've got very few people in your environment who understand cryptography. And you know, it may sound a bit trite, but you need to understand cryptography. You need a few people who understand cryptography to get these changes planned and implemented correctly. And as Scott says, you know, the supply chain is yet another problem. How many of your suppliers have the staff that actually understand this? Because a lot of these guys are small suppliers. If you look at the vulnerabilities that we've been seeing in code bases for a lot of security devices, yeah, how confident are you that they're going to rapidly be able to implement new algorithms? Does their architecture allow it to be changed? So I think these are real challenges, and these, you know, in my world, these are real risks that will need to be put on a register. People need to understand, and appropriate mitigations found for them.
Yeah, I think you wound up answering a question I asked this morning about sort of what should our kids be focusing on. It sounds like cryptography is something we should.
Well, you don't need many of it, right? Yeah, many of us, but get some.
Yeah, right. So, okay, I think we have a pretty good sense of the landscape now. So let's turn to Quantumsafe.
Yep.
So can you walk us through it? What are the kind of leading quantum-safe cryptographic techniques right now?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, at a high level, I'll let you go deeper if you want. But like high level, like a lot of these math kind of approaches have been around for a while, yeah, which is good because that means people have thought about them and beaten on them, et cetera, et cetera. The same year that IBM put out the first 5-qubit computer on the cloud, NIST kicked off a post-quantum cryptography, I don't know if it was coincident or not, post-quantum cryptography selection process. And that just, like the first round of that just ended last year. So like one part of it is like coming up with the brilliant mathematicians coming up with new math that both quantum computers and classical computers suck at. In one direction, it's easy for a classical computer to compute in the other direction because that's like good cryptography is based on that. You know, a lot of them were in the Zurich lab at IBM, so we knew this stuff pretty cold. Those standards came out last year. So the 3 standards came out last year. Crystal Kyber, you can see it on the screen, right? So I won't go try to remember the numbers, et cetera, et cetera. But so basically that's like how I can, in a post-quantum way, exchange keys, you know, the public key thing that you were talking about, and also do digital signatures. The challenge with these are, one, we always want like more approaches to hedge our bets. The second is that although they tried to find things that were pretty much a drop-in for what we're using today from a performance point of view, and in some of these cases, the performance is actually better here than on the previous algorithms. The bit size, you know, especially for the digital signature ones, is longer. So like for a Bitcoin example, like your key for doing your address exchange is like, I think 10 times longer roughly for Falcon, and like 100 times larger for Sphinx, just to give you a feel. So we also do want, like NIST does want to, you know, keep the innovation standards going, you know, to solve those kind of problems and like have like potentially more efficient algorithms and have a diversity of algorithms. So, sorry, I'll do 2 more minutes. First 2 use lattice-based cryptography, which like as a non-cryptographer in my simple head I can figure out is like, I've got a lattice of points out there. What's the shortest vector to the, if I give you 1 point like on the entire space, what's the shortest vector to the next lattice point or closest lattice point? That again sounds fairly easy, maybe not the way I explained it, but it sounds fairly easy, but it's one of those deceptively hard computational problems, kind of like factoring. And then the like oil and vinegar approach is like multivariate combinations, like, so it's using multivariate calculations to do something similar. Like, so you can, in your head, simplify it right down, like, A times X plus B times Y plus Z times blah, blah, equals blank. A bunch of those equations, simultaneously solving that seems fairly easy to go backwards, but actually is deceptively hard. So it's a good cryptography method. And we think that these don't line up really well with the kind of fine patterns in group theory, blah, 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 that Jay was talking about earlier. So, sorry.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I'd like to add here, NIST, when they launched their, and they called it competition, because that in the cryptographic world, that's how things
spurs innovation.
Yeah.
Right.
So all these various cryptographers around the world have been submitting these, and the point I'd like to make is that what then happens is peer review. So it's not just it goes to NIST, the bright guys at NIST study it. It becomes open to all of the cryptographers in the world, basically, to comment on. And to Scott's point, some of the maths behind this is pretty weird.
Right.
But the guys who understand the weird stuff are looking at this as well, and they're the ones who are saying, yeah, this is a one-way function, or it's incredibly hard to go the other way. So I think we should feel confident in the process. I think we should feel confident that NIST is continuing to drive this forward. I think it's one of these rare occasions where NIST, which is a US-based standards body, is really being supported by the rest of the world as well. It's, the standards that come out of NIST and the FIPS standards will be the ones that will go on the requirements that individual enterprises.
It's an interesting point, because like if you look at where these came from,
Yep.
majority of the collaborators on these were from Europe.
Yeah. For some reason, the Dutch are pretty good at all this stuff. But there's been some really good work done here. I think the key length problem, I think there was initially a bit of keys are much bigger. We're now living in a world, but the storage sizes are almost irrelevant.
Yeah, dig into that a little bit. Maybe explain for folks what that problem is.
The key length is effectively, measured in bits, and the lengths have gone up. We're talking in public key cryptography. We're generally talking about minimum of 2048 bits of data at the moment for an RSA, and many are using 4096. If you're suddenly talking about 10,000 bits, it sounds like it's a huge problem. It's compared to the data that you're signing and storing, it's nothing.
Yeah, it's not 1973.
And the transmission speeds that we have nowadays mean that you can do key exchange quite quickly, and
so for most use cases, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
But there is concern for like really small edge kind of use cases that it is a hit to bandwidth because you're sending more data. But
yeah, I perhaps shouldn't say this, but I find it ironic that a lot of edge device manufacturers are complaining about this, and yet they haven't actually implemented RSA at the moment. So, yeah.
Right. That's a great point. So, we've touched on this a little bit, but what do you think some of the challenges that organizations might face transitioning to these approaches might be?
I think it's what he said already.
Yeah.
So the biggest problems, I've already mentioned you've got to find out where you're using it. So
absolutely, yeah.
Assuming you found it out and you found out what you're currently using as your algorithm, you need to be able to plan now. That means you need people who understand. So I think, as Jay mentioned, the education program, and we mentioned it in AI this morning as well, becomes incredibly important. So we don't need everyone to be an expert in quantum. What we need is that corpus of people in each environment who understand what they need to know to plan So what are the parameters that go into each algorithm? What are the ones that we're currently using? Can we easily fulfill them? So they need to have that understanding so that they can look at the differences. We need to get that education program rolling now. Yeah, we need to get that identification of where we're using cryptography going now. I think, as Scott mentioned, because of the supply chain issues, I think we should be putting together programs that start those questions for our supply chain now, because they are going to need to be enforced and checked, and that's not going to be fun.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my question. What would be like your fantasy roadmap for a transition? And it sounds like it starts with education for both of you.
Yeah.
And this kind of inventory idea, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this is like, it's like we planned this, which we didn't.
Yeah.
But like, so
It's weird.
Yeah, weird.
yeah. So I mean, so like from our perspective, like the three things is: one, like know what you got; two, like we're a big proponent of creating a C-bomb, which is basically a cryptographic bill of materials.
Yeah.
Like there's this software bill of materials concept out there, but it's both for your in-house stuff, so you know what to go fix, that code scanning, blah, 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 and know how to go fix. But it's also a C-bomb for your vendors' stuff also. And then it's remediation. And there's a bunch of different ways you can remediate stuff. You can just go in and fix it. You can put an adaptive proxy on top of it so you don't have to fix it. Or you can just go to a completely different method.
Yep.
And use a different secrets management company or whatever. And it's likely going to be a mix, and I think there's going to be, it's enough of a disruption that I think it will cause some CIOs and CISOs to think about, maybe I should just change the whole process of how I'm doing this. And there'll be opportunities for companies who like step in and, there's a lot of buzzwords going around like crypto agility, but I think there's some truth to that. Like if you're going to fix it, do it in such a way that like it takes you 1/10 of the amount of effort to fix it the next time.
Because there will be a next time for some of these.
Yeah.
It's almost like we talked. We only met just before this call. So it's sort of fairly standard stuff. This, So yes, there's a couple of specifics here in that we need to do let's find the crypto assets or whatever. Let's do the education. But the rest of this is about planning a program of work. So you need to have your risks identified. So we know where they are. We know what the risks are. We now start building our program of work, and we prioritize the mitigations based on a number of factors. How big's the risk? How much effort's going to be involved? And to that end, and I think Scott's absolutely right here, that there will be a number of cases where people will go, well, this is actually a really good opportunity to change provider or to change the way that we do things. And it's a fairly easy discussion to have. It might be financially difficult for some firms, some in the supply chain. But it's build that program of work, and you need that support. We need to make sure people understand it's a program of work. And from previous experience, you'll need to go to your exec committee with the full quantified piece of work, because they need to understand, and you need to be able to tell them that we need to do these things first, because if we don't, we're effectively exposing whatever, whether it's our customer database or our transaction history or whatever, we're leaving ourselves open. So you will be able to prioritize, and that will help you if you've done the risk identification properly.
Yeah, I mean, it seems the costs involved in that could be huge, but the risks even higher, right? So.
It could be.
Yeah.
And that's why you've got to prioritize it, because some of these things will need doing, but in the grand scheme of things, the risks associated with exposure are going to be so small that you can put them lower down the pecking order.
And then, do you think there are any kind of, what are the challenges or the feasibility of kind of balancing operational continuity whilst you're doing this? I mean, is that even possible, or?
That's exactly why you need a program of work.
Right.
because you can then make those comparisons. Yeah, the worst thing is going to the CIO or even higher to the exec committee or the board and saying, hey, we think this is a good idea.
Yeah, right.
Or try the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, doubt approach, and say you've got to do this, otherwise our whole business is trash. You're not giving them something to work with. Because it's a program of work, ideally you can resource your, if you like, your BAU operations to continue, and you've got a program team that's working on churning through these. And dare I say we should have started earlier, but we've got time to do this in a program of work basis.
Yeah, I mean, it's a heck of a lot easier if you build this into, I mean, most companies out there have some, depending on what they call it, I'm putting air quotes around, but digital transformation efforts of some sort going on. This is like a plug-in to that. I mean, it's like if you're doing like modernization efforts already, this is something that, like, if you've got a scanning tool that's appropriate to, pick out where your crypto is as part of that modernization process, you put it into your your DevOps, DevSecOps or whatever process. I mean, it's a pain in the ass, and it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of risk involved. It's not rocket science, but it is like good project management, good underlying tools, and good methodology.
So, okay, so I think we've got a bit of idea of the plan that we should be pursuing, but this is a bit of my own kind of hobby horse question a little bit, but I always like to kind of angle it back towards people, right? So what do we think are the kind of skills and expertise that IT professionals need to develop? But then let's also think about kind of even just the risk professionals and the managers as well, that's kind of non-IT people. What's the skill set of the future look like?
I think there's a sort of a core baseline of education that needs to be given to people who are going to be actively involved in the planning of this. So whether they be risk professionals or they be IT folk who are going to get tasked with putting the plan together. So I think that level of education, it doesn't need to go across the board. It needs to go to the key individuals who are going to lead this program of work. I've already said that you need to have some cryptographic skills.
Yeah.
I think from a risk point of view, it should be easy for a risk professional. They just need to understand what's at risk, what are the assets that are at risk, and what are the mitigation costs, because they're probably the ones who are going to first stand up in front of probably the risk committee first of all, and have to defend this. So they need to have that knowledge and understanding. But I think the sort of quantum specific skills come with, once you've got the go ahead to start this, you're going to need some people who understand, who are there as almost like subject matter experts that the IT implementation team can deal with, or the respondents from your supply chain questions.
Right.
Because you're going to get some BS answers from suppliers. Let's not beat around the bush. Some suppliers will send back their standard response that says, "Yeah, we got this in hand. Trust us." That's a surefire way to make yourself very popular with your risk committee.
You mentioned Y2K. I remember that. Getting a lot of answers from that era. But Scott, how about like from a quantum, like real quantum safe angle? Do you anything you want to add to that in terms of skills? And I'm really thinking about like people in this room. Like, how should they be thinking about educating themselves on this?
Well, I think generally, again, I'm not a cryptographer, but I'm lucky to sit next to one. I have a lot of respect for people who do security as a living. Like, I have a little bit of like perspective from both being associated with a program that is a cloud native service, that we have to think about this from a going and fixing it point of view, as well as like helping build tools for it. I would say, generally, if this as a wake-up call increases the number of people who are security crypto security or cybersecurity professionals in the IT supply chain industry. That is a good thing because, again, most of the risk is going to be hygiene and discovery and blah, 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 blah. And frankly, I'd say the industry may be a little bit like not as secure as we think it is in general. So I don't think it's like new skills. I think we have a shortage of security skills in general. That would be my first answer. In terms of understanding, I absolutely think it's education. I think there's a couple things that people need to think about, as risk professionals or in cybersecurity. One of them is they need to think about, like, there's this thing called harvest now, decrypt later, which is like a massive paranoia if you're in the government space, but also can be applicably like concerning if you're in some industries. And that is basically that people are collecting all the information going over the internet now, so in 10 years they can go decrypt it later. So basically collect all the information now, including some of the private keys that are encapsulated, that are sending back and forth, or the digital signature things, and then decrypt that key 10 years from now, and then decrypt all the data that was encrypted with that key, later. So there's that risk that people need to understand, and understand what the implications for the industry is. For some, it may be none. For others, it might be significant. The other thing that I think from an educational point of view is understanding some industries have very long-lived platforms out there, that they're making platform decisions or capital decisions on deploying platforms that are going to be out there for 10, 15, 20 years. So think telecom, think transportation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They also need to think, the risk professionals and the security professionals need to think about what do I need to do in terms of timing and risk, in terms of platforms are going to launch in 2026 that are going to be in the field until 2036. Because there might be a little bit of urgency to get your crap together, and make that platform post-quantum cryptographically secure, before you're hardening things that might be hard to go fix later when it's in the field.
No, I think there's two key points that Scott's just raised. One of them directly, which is this, understand the longevity of some of the platforms. So, if you work in telco, if you work in probably energy, if you're a generator, you probably don't want to make too many changes to your networks. So that's a really good call. The other thing, and it's related to what Scott started on, you need someone to be able to understand some of the stated threats. So, harvest now, decrypt later is one, a term. But there's other things like there's password guessing, which is the concept that you'll collect. So you use another one of the algorithms, Grover's algorithm, to do some work, which enables you to do searches a lot faster, which means you could guess more passwords. So it's a sort of a real threat to some systems. So you need to understand if you have a system that is reliant on passwords, that could lift it up in the rankings. But what you also need is to be able to understand what these threats are so that you can, if you like, debunk some of the paranoia that is either in the press at the moment or is likely to appear in the press or on Reddit or wherever. You've got to shatter some of these myths.
Yeah. So before we'll turn over to questions in a moment, I'll just ask my one pop quiz question. And you probably already answered it a bit, but what's the one topic you wish people were talking about more in this area? Or no, Mark, go ahead, Charlie.
I just really wish I could go and talk to a CISO and say, do you know where all of your crypto
I figured you were going to say that, yeah.
And if they said yes, I'd say, you're lying, aren't you?
What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, I guess my wish, this is like a more an emotional kind of thing, is to his point, like, it's kind of bimodal. Like, the reaction usually get when talking about this is like oh my God, the world is collapsing,
Yep.
or that's the next CISO's problem. I'm serious. I'm very serious.
Yeah,
right?
believe
So, and it's pretty damn close to 50-50 bimodal, honestly, in the conversations I've had. So, we need to get to someplace in the middle because this is going to your point, this is going to take planning. This can be a fairly straightforward transition with planning, and if it's like integrated into process. But most industry clients that we work with, I shouldn't say most, a lot of industry clients that we work with, are living kind of project to project or transformation to transformation and don't have kind of like the methodology or process to make this easy, like implement, not just from the security side, but also from just transformation in general side. So, again, so I'm kind of repeating myself now, but it's like, what I wish the most would be kind of like the sense of like rational urgency. Would be my wish. And like, so we have at IBM like kind of like been the seed in the oyster in the telco industry and some of the payment industries because like, obviously we know a lot about quantum computing. Obviously we want people to get quantum safe before quantum computers get big enough theoretically to break stuff because we want to sell quantum computers and not have people like going, you can't sell them because, so, we think the technology and the understanding and the math and all that stuff is there to allow this to like work out from a time point of view, but it's gonna take some, like, it's gonna take people starting now. Like, they don't have to finish now, but they definitely need to start now.
Yeah.
Rational urgency.
Yeah, that's cool.
I like it. So with that, why don't we open it up to questions in the audience, if folks have any?
Stunned.
Tiffany?
I'll keep it short because I know we're almost at time. Tiffany Tribbett, S&P Global. I'm curious though, snapshot, hot take, how much awareness do you think there is in C-suites at different companies about what's happening in the quantum space and the changes to those kind of cybersecurity and cryptography that they're going to need to make? Do you think, not the I mean, maybe also the CISOs, but do you think CEOs and kind of the people making the calls are aware?
I'd say maybe 70%-ish would be my guess. So definitely better than a couple years ago, but I would have thought it'd be like 90+% by now. I'm just being honest. Like, so I am surprised sometimes. I'm surprised sometimes, and I think it's a statement of like the amount of crap on a CISO's desk right now of dealing with like the day-to-day urgency is pretty darn high. But still, I would have expected to be higher.
I'll be totally candid. I think that there is a level of awareness at a CEO level. I hope there's more than a level of awareness at a CISO level. I think there's a huge gap in making the CEO and the board aware of the size of the problem, because that requires work. And I don't believe that a lot of firms have started that work.
Great.
He said, smile.
Is there questions, Sadiq?
Oh, no. I can close out, but if there's other questions.
Yeah, if there's no other questions, yeah, please do.
All right. Yeah, I was just going to close out.
Yeah,
so.
please do. Thank you.
Right?
Thank you, gentlemen.